My name is Jessica, and at 29 years old, I never imagined I'd be dealing with this level of family betrayal. 6 months ago, I lost my business partner and closest friend, Maria, in a tragic car accident. She was only 31, and we had been building our digital marketing agency together for 4 years. 3 weeks after her funeral, my younger brother David dropped a bombshell at our family's 4th of July barbecue in Phoenix, Arizona. He announced that Maria had secretly promised him half of our $1.2 million company, showing everyone what he claimed was a signed partnership agreement. What he didn't know was why I could barely contain my shock. Not because of his audacity, but because of what I knew he couldn't possibly know. If you're reading this and family drama hits close to home, buckle up. You'll want to hear how this unfolded. Maria Rodriguez and I met 5 years ago at a digital marketing conference in Austin. I was working for a corporate firm called Sterling Communications that treated employees like numbers on a spreadsheet, and she was freelancing while dreaming of something bigger. During a break between sessions about the future of social media advertising, we found ourselves commiserating over $12 conference coffee about the state of the industry, how agencies promised the world but delivered generic campaigns that missed the mark entirely. What if we did it differently? Maria asked, her dark eyes lighting up with the kind of enthusiasm that was infectious. She had this way of speaking with her hands, gesturing animatedly as ideas flowed. Real strategies, actual results, treating clients like partners instead of ATM machines. What if we actually cared about their success instead of just billing hours? That conversation lasted 3 hours and planted the seed for what would become Phoenix Digital Solutions. We talked about everything: the corporate bureaucracy that stifled creativity, the clients who deserved better than cookie-cutter campaigns, and our shared vision of building something meaningful. Maria was brilliant with analytics and strategy, her mind working like a computer when it came to data interpretation, while I brought creative vision and client relations skills that had been underutilized at Sterling. We complemented each other perfectly, and within 6 months of that conference, we had quit our jobs and were working out of my cramped garage apartment in Tempe. The early days were brutal. 18-hour days fueled by gas station coffee, ramen noodle dinners, and constant uncertainty about whether we'd make rent. I remember nights when we'd fall asleep at our makeshift desks, surrounded by client proposals and financial projections that never seemed to add up quite right. But we were building something meaningful. Our first major client was a local restaurant chain called Desert Bloom Dining that was struggling with their online presence. The owner, Carlos Mendez, had tried 3 different marketing agencies before finding us, each one promising dramatic results and delivering disappointment. When Carlos walked into our garage office, really just 2 folding tables and a whiteboard, I could see the skepticism in his eyes. "Look," he said, settling into a plastic lawn chair that served as our client seating. "I've been burned before. I'm not looking for fancy presentations or unrealistic promises. I just need someone who understands my business and can actually move the needle." Maria and I spent the next 4 hours with Carlos, diving deep into his business model, understanding his customer base, and developing a comprehensive strategy that addressed not just social media presence, but the entire customer journey. We created targeted campaigns for each of his 5 restaurant locations, developed a loyalty program that encouraged repeat visits, and implemented a review management system that turned satisfied customers into brand ambassadors. Within 6 months, we had increased Desert Bloom's revenue by 300% through targeted social media campaigns and website optimization. More importantly, we had built a relationship with Carlos that extended beyond the typical agency-client dynamic. He became our biggest advocate, referring other business owners and even investing in our company during our first round of funding. Word spread quickly in Phoenix's tight-knit business community. Local business journal Phoenix Business Weekly wrote a feature about our innovative approach to small business marketing, and suddenly, we were fielding calls from companies across the Southwest. By year 2, we had moved into a proper office space in Scottsdale, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that Maria had found and fallen in love with, and hired our first employees. By year 3, we were featured in Phoenix Business Journal as one of the city's fastest-growing small businesses, with annual revenue approaching 7 figures. We had expanded our team to include specialists in web development, graphic design, and content creation. Our client roster included everyone from local nonprofits to national corporations looking to establish a stronger presence in the Southwest market. Maria and I split everything 50-50. Ownership, profits, decision-making. We had learned from watching other partnerships fail that success required not just shared vision, but also clearly defined roles and responsibilities. I handled business development, client relations, and the creative direction of campaigns, while Maria focused on analytics, operations, and the technical aspects of digital marketing. It wasn't just a business partnership. It was a friendship built on mutual respect, shared values, and complementary skills. Our office became a second home, decorated with succulents that Maria obsessively cared for, and motivational quotes that I had printed and framed. We hosted monthly team meetings that felt more like family dinners, complete with Maria's homemade tamales and my failed attempts at healthy smoothies. We celebrated every victory together, from landing new clients to employee promotions, and supported each other through the inevitable challenges of running a growing business. My family had always been supportive of my entrepreneurial journey, especially after the rough start I'd had in corporate America. My parents, Robert and Linda Martinez, owned a small accounting firm called Martinez and Associates that they had built from scratch over 25 years. They understood the challenges of running a business, the long hours, the financial uncertainty, the constant pressure to innovate and grow. They had watched me struggle at Sterling Communications, coming home exhausted and frustrated, and celebrated when I finally found the courage to strike out on my own. My brother David, 3 years younger at 26, had taken a different path entirely. After dropping out of Arizona State University twice, first from business school, then from a construction management program, he had bounced between various jobs without ever seeming to find his footing. He'd worked as a bartender at several establishments around Phoenix, managed a retail store for 6 months before being let go for attendance issues, and most recently had been working construction for a company that specialized in high-end residential projects. David and I had been close growing up, bonding over shared interests in hiking the desert trails around Phoenix and our mutual love of classic rock music. Some of my best childhood memories involved camping trips to Sedona, where David and I would stay up late around the campfire, making plans for the adventures we'd have as adults. He was charismatic and funny, the kind of person who could make friends anywhere and had a natural talent for making people laugh. But our relationship had become increasingly strained over the years as our paths diverged. It wasn't just the different choices we'd made, it was David's attitude toward my success. When Maria and I started getting recognition for our work, David's comments became increasingly bitter and cutting. "Must be nice to have rich clients hand you money," he'd say, dismissing the years of struggle and sacrifice that had built our reputation. When we bought our office space, he made snide remarks about playing businesswoman, while he was doing real work with his hands. The comments stung because they came from someone whose opinion had always mattered to me. David had a way of making everything sound like a personal affront to his own choices, as if my success somehow diminished his worth as a person. Family gatherings became tense affairs, where I found myself downplaying achievements to avoid triggering one of his bitter monologues about how some people had all the luck, while others had to struggle for everything. Still, he was family, and I tried to include him when I could. Last Christmas, after Maria had suggested we needed to expand our team to handle growing demand, I had even offered David a position at our company, entry-level marketing assistant with room to grow and learn the business. It would have been perfect for someone looking to transition into a new career field with competitive pay and the chance to work alongside experienced professionals. He turned it down flat, saying he didn't want charity and that digital marketing was just fancy lying anyway. The conversation had devolved into an argument where David accused me of trying to control his life, and I accused him of being too proud to accept help when he clearly needed it. We didn't speak for 2 months after that fight. The tension came to a head about 8 months before Maria's accident. David had shown up at our office one afternoon, clearly having been drinking, demanding to speak with me privately. Our receptionist, Sarah, had tried to explain that I was in a client meeting, but David had made such a scene that I had to excuse myself to deal with the situation. He was going through another rough patch. His latest girlfriend, Ashley, had left him after discovering he'd been hiding debt from her, and he'd been fired from his construction job for repeated tardiness and what his supervisor called attitude problems. I could smell alcohol on his breath as he slumped in the chair across from my desk, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by something desperate and angry. "You owe me," he said, his words slightly slurred, but his eyes sharp with resentment. "All these years, watching you get everything handed to you while I struggle. Mom and Dad think you walk on water. The least you could do is cut me in on some of this success." "David, we've been through this," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm despite the embarrassment of having this conversation in my workplace. Through the glass walls of my office, I could see Maria and our employees trying to pretend they weren't listening. Success wasn't handed to me. Maria and I worked incredibly hard to build this company. We started with nothing and sacrificed everything to get where we are. And I've offered to help you find your place here, but you have to actually want it. "I don't want your pity job," he spat, leaning forward aggressively. "Answering phones and fetching coffee for your precious clients. I want what I deserve as your brother. A real stake in this business. Real ownership. Not some charity position where you can feel good about helping poor David." "That's not how business works," I said firmly, my patience finally wearing thin. "Maria and I are equal partners because we built this together from day one. We put in equal time, equal money, equal risk. You can't just claim ownership because we share DNA." "Family should mean something," he said, his voice rising. "All those years Mom and Dad spent more money on your college than mine, all the times they praised your achievements while I was just the screw-up. Now you're successful, and I'm struggling, and you won't even throw me a bone." "That's not fair, and you know it," I shot back. "Mom and Dad spent exactly the same amount on both our educations. You chose to drop out twice. And I've offered you opportunities, real opportunities, but you keep turning them down because your pride won't let you start at the bottom like everyone else." The argument continued for another 20 minutes, with David becoming increasingly hostile and me becoming increasingly frustrated. He accused me of looking down on him, of thinking I was better than him because I had a college degree and a successful business. I accused him of expecting special treatment because of family connections while refusing to do the actual work required to earn respect in any field. Finally, I'd had enough. David, you need to leave. You're drunk, you're disrupting my workplace, and you're saying things you're going to regret. We can talk about this when you're sober and ready to have an actual conversation about your future instead of just complaining about mine. He left angry, slamming my office door hard enough that the glass rattled, and our relationship became even more distant after that incident. He stopped coming to family dinners when he knew I'd be there, and when we did interact at unavoidable events like birthdays or holidays, he was cold and resentful. My parents tried to mediate, suggesting family counseling or arranged conversations, but I held firm. I wasn't going to compromise the business Maria and I had built just to appease David's sense of entitlement. He's just going through a rough time, my mother would say, always making excuses for David's behavior. You know how hard it's been for him to find his path. Maybe if you could just give him a chance. But I had given him chances, multiple chances, and each time he had rejected them because they didn't meet his inflated expectations of what he deserved, simply by virtue of being my brother. Then came that terrible February morning that changed everything. Maria was driving to an early client meeting with one of our biggest accounts, a tech startup that was preparing for a major product launch. She had been excited about the presentation, staying late the night before to perfect the social media strategy that would accompany their launch campaign. The meeting was scheduled for 7 a.m., unusually early, but the client's CEO was flying to San Francisco that afternoon, and it was the only time that worked. Maria was always punctual, almost obsessively so, which is why she left her apartment in Central Phoenix at 6:15 that morning for what should have been a 20-minute drive to the client's office in Scottsdale. She was driving her silver Honda Civic, the same car she'd had since college, reliable and practical just like everything else about Maria. She always took the same route, Central Avenue to the 101, then east to Scottsdale Road. At 6:38 a.m., at the intersection of Central Avenue and Thomas Road, a drunk driver in a lifted pickup truck ran a red light, going approximately 60 miles per hour and hit Maria's car head-on. The impact was so severe that Maria's car was pushed into the intersection and struck by two additional vehicles whose drivers couldn't stop in time. Maria was killed instantly. The drunk driver, a 24-year-old named Brandon Walsh, walked away with minor injuries and a blood alcohol level that was 3 times the legal limit. He had been at a casino all night, gambling away money he didn't have, and drinking heavily after losing his rent money at the blackjack tables. The other drivers involved suffered various injuries, but survived. I got the call at 7:15 a.m. from Detective Sarah Rodriguez. No relation to Maria, just one of those cruel coincidences that seemed to mock the situation. I was in my kitchen making coffee and reviewing notes for a presentation I was supposed to give that afternoon when my phone rang with an unknown number. "Is this Jessica Martinez?" the voice asked, professional but gentle. "Yes, this is Jessica." "Miss Martinez, I'm Detective Rodriguez with the Phoenix Police Department. I'm calling about Maria Rodriguez. Are you listed as her emergency contact?" The world seemed to stop. Maria and I had made each other our emergency contacts when we started the business, partly for practical reasons, but mostly because we had become each other's family. "Yes, I am. What's happened? Is she okay?" The detective's explanation felt surreal, like something happening to someone else. Car accident. Drunk driver. Killed on impact. The words didn't seem to connect to the vibrant, intelligent woman I had talked to just 12 hours earlier about client strategies and weekend plans. I don't remember hanging up the phone or getting dressed or driving to the hospital, but somehow I found myself in a sterile waiting room, filled with fluorescent lights and the smell of disinfectant, speaking with doctors and police officers and social workers who all seemed to be talking about someone I didn't recognize. The Maria they described, the victim of a tragic accident, couldn't possibly be the same person who had texted me at 11 p.m. the night before with a funny meme about marketing executives. The next weeks were a blur of funeral arrangements, legal meetings, and trying to keep the business running while processing grief that felt like a physical weight on my chest. Maria had been more than a business partner. She was the sister I'd chosen, the person who understood my vision and challenged me to be better. She had an infectious laugh that could lighten any mood, and an analytical mind that could solve problems I didn't even know we had. Her death left a hole in my life that felt impossible to fill. The funeral was held at St. Ansarid Augustine Cathedral in downtown Phoenix, the same church where Maria had been baptized as a baby. The service was conducted in both English and Spanish, reflecting Maria's deep connection to her Mexican heritage. Her parents, Juan and Carmen Rodriguez, were devastated but gracious, thanking everyone who came to pay their respects. The church was packed with not just family and friends, but clients whose businesses had been transformed by Maria's expertise, employees whose careers had been shaped by her mentorship, and competitors who respected her professional integrity. I spoke at the service, trying to capture what Maria had meant not just to me, but to everyone whose lives she had touched. I talked about her passion for helping small businesses succeed, her commitment to ethical marketing practices, and her belief that every client deserved authentic attention rather than generic solutions. I talked about her dreams of expanding our company into other markets, her plans to establish a scholarship fund for young Latinas interested in business, and her unwavering optimism, even during the most challenging times. But mostly, I talked about the friendship that had sustained both our personal and professional partnership. How Maria had a gift for seeing potential in people and situations that others might overlook. How she could find humor in the most stressful moments and hope in the most challenging circumstances. How she had taught me that true success wasn't just about financial achievement, but about building something meaningful that made a positive difference in the world. According to our partnership agreement, which we had carefully structured with the help of attorney Jennifer Walsh 3 years earlier, Maria's 50% share of the business would go to her estate, which meant her parents, Juan and Carmen Rodriguez. They were grieving their only daughter and had no interest in running a digital marketing agency. Juan worked as a supervisor at a manufacturing plant, and Carmen was a retired elementary school teacher. They understood business concepts but had no experience with the specific demands of our industry. We arranged for me to buy out their share over time, giving them immediate financial support while allowing me to maintain control of the company we had built. The arrangement was fair and beneficial to everyone involved. Juan and Carmen received a substantial payout that would support them in their retirement years, and I retained control of the business that represented 4 years of intensive work and sacrifice. The legal process was complicated, but straightforward. Maria and I had worked with Jennifer Walsh, one of Phoenix's most respected business attorneys, to ensure our partnership was properly documented. Everything was clear and legitimate, filed with the state of Arizona, and properly notarized. We had learned from watching other business partnerships fail due to unclear agreements and had invested significant time and money in creating documentation that would protect both parties in any conceivable situation. Jennifer's law firm, Walsh & Associates, occupied a full floor of a downtown Phoenix high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered stunning views of the desert mountains surrounding the city. Jennifer herself was in her 50s, with silver hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that had made her one of the most sought-after business attorneys in the Southwest. She had guided us through the process of incorporating our business, structuring our partnership agreement, and establishing the legal frameworks that allowed us to work with confidence. During this difficult period, David was surprisingly supportive. He came to the funeral, helped with arrangements, and even offered to help at the office during the transition. I was touched by his kindness and thought maybe Maria's death had put our petty conflicts into perspective. He seemed genuinely sorry for his behavior during that confrontation in my office, and for the first time in months, we were able to have normal conversations without underlying tension. "I know we haven't always gotten along," he said to me the day after the funeral, as we sat in my parents' backyard, sharing memories and processing grief. "But I want you to know that I respected Maria. She was good for you, and she was good for the business. If there's anything I can do to help during this transition, just let me know." I was grateful for his support and optimistic that maybe we could rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than competition and resentment. For a few weeks, it felt like we might actually become close again, the way we had been as children before life and choices and circumstances had driven a wedge between us. That illusion shattered completely at the 4th of July barbecue. The whole extended family was gathered at my parents' house in Tempe. Aunts, uncles, cousins. About 20 people total, including some family friends who had become honorary relatives over the years. The Arizona heat was brutal even in the early evening, with temperatures still hovering near 110 degrees, but the backyard was festive with red, white, and blue decorations. My mother had outdone herself with the spread, preparing her famous green chile enchiladas, my father's specialty grilled corn, and enough side dishes to feed twice as many people. For the first time since Maria's death, I was feeling something close to normal. My cousin Elena's twin daughters were running around the yard with sparklers. My uncle Roberto was telling the same stories he told every year about his time in the military. And my aunt Carmen was organizing a fierce game of loteria that had everyone laughing and shouting. The familiar rhythms of family gatherings, the overlapping conversations in English and Spanish, the smell of mesquite smoke from the grill, the sound of children playing, provided a comforting sense of continuity after months of upheaval. I was helping my Aunt Sarah arrange desserts on the kitchen table when David stood up from his chair near the pool and tapped his beer bottle with a fork, calling for everyone's attention. The conversations gradually died down as people turned to look at him, expecting perhaps a toast to America or a funny story about work. "I have an announcement to make," he said, his voice carrying across the yard with unusual seriousness. "It's about Jessica's business." Something in his tone made my stomach drop. I looked around at the sea of expectant faces, my parents, relatives, family friends who had watched me build my career from those early days working out of my garage. David looked nervous but determined, like someone about to jump off a high dive who wasn't entirely sure about the depth of the water below. "Many of you know that Jessica lost her business partner Maria a few months ago," he began, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite identify. What you don't know is that before she died, Maria came to me with concerns about the direction of the company. I felt the world start to tilt. Where was this going? Around the yard, people were setting down their plates and drinks, sensing that this was about to become something more serious than a typical family announcement. She was worried that Jessica was making decisions that would hurt the business long term, David continued, pulling a folded document from his back pocket. Expanding too fast, taking on clients that weren't a good fit, ignoring the financial fundamentals that make a business sustainable. I wanted to interrupt, to stop whatever was happening before it went further, but I was frozen by the sheer audacity of what I was hearing. This was a complete fabrication, and David was delivering it with the confidence of someone sharing established facts. So she asked me to become a silent partner, he said, holding up the papers. To help provide stability and oversight, to bring some real-world business experience, to balance out the academic theories that weren't working in practice. He paused for dramatic effect, looking around the yard to make sure he had everyone's attention. This is a partnership agreement, signed by Maria just 3 weeks before she died. It grants me a 25% stake in Phoenix Digital Solutions, making me an equal partner with Jessica and Maria's estate. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. My father looked stunned, his mouth slightly open as he processed what he'd just heard. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Several relatives started murmuring among themselves, and I could hear fragments of conversation in both English and Spanish as people tried to make sense of this unexpected revelation. Uncle Roberto was shaking his head slowly, and I could see him exchanging meaningful glances with my father. Aunt Carmen had stopped arranging the loteria cards and was staring at David with an expression of confusion and concern. The children, sensing that the adult mood had shifted dramatically, had stopped playing and were clustering around their parents. But instead of the shock or devastation David was clearly expecting, I felt something entirely different. The urge to laugh. Not from joy or amusement, but from the sheer absurdity of what I was hearing. David had no idea what he'd walked into, no understanding of how thoroughly his lies could be exposed, no comprehension of the evidence that existed to contradict every word he'd just spoken. The urge to laugh was so strong that I had to bite my lip to keep from responding inappropriately. This wasn't funny. It was actually quite serious and potentially damaging. But there was something almost comic about the confidence with which David was presenting claims that I knew to be completely false. David, I said carefully, my voice steady despite the adrenaline that was suddenly coursing through my system. Can I see that document? He walked over to where I was standing, near the dessert table, and handed it to me with a confidence that would have been impressive if it weren't so completely misplaced. I could feel the weight of everyone's attention as I unfolded the papers and began to scan them. Even at first glance, several things were glaringly wrong. The formatting looked professional enough to fool someone unfamiliar with legal documents, but it was inconsistent with how our actual partnership documents were written. The legal language used phrases and terminology that Jennifer Walsh would never have included in an official agreement. The signature, while a decent attempt at mimicking Maria's handwriting, lacked several distinctive characteristics that I knew as well as my own name. Most obviously, the notary stamp was from someone I'd never heard of, and the witness signatures were completely unfamiliar. Every legitimate change to our partnership agreement required specific witnesses and notarization procedures that Jennifer had established to prevent exactly this kind of fraud. This is interesting, I said, folding the document carefully and handing it back to David. We should definitely discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss privately, David said, his voice getting louder and more confident. He was clearly riding high on the shocked reactions from our family members and interpreted my calm response as acceptance of his claims. Maria wanted me involved in the business. She saw what I could bring to the table that you were missing. And what exactly could you bring to the table? I asked, genuinely curious to hear his answer and wondering how deep this fabrication went. Real-world experience, he said without hesitation. Maria told me she was tired of your ivory tower approach to business. You've got book smarts and client relationships, but you don't understand what working people actually need. She wanted someone who understood the practical side of running a company. I nodded slowly, fighting the urge to correct the numerous factual errors in his statement. Maria had never expressed any concerns about my business approach. Quite the opposite, actually. She frequently praised my ability to connect with clients from all backgrounds and my practical problem-solving skills. The ivory tower criticism was particularly ironic coming from someone who had never successfully completed a college program or held a steady job for more than 6 months. When exactly did Maria come to you with these concerns? I asked, continuing my gentle interrogation. January, he said without hesitation, clearly having prepared for this question. She called me on a Tuesday night and asked to meet at that coffee shop on Central Avenue, the one with the blue awning and the outdoor seating. She was really upset about some decisions you'd made. Which coffee shop specifically? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be vague. The one with the blue awning, he repeated, his confidence wavering slightly. You know, the place where all the business people go for meetings. And what decisions was she upset about? This is where David's story began to fall apart completely. He claimed Maria was concerned about our expansion plans, but couldn't specify what those plans were. He said she was worried about our client retention rates, but couldn't name any clients we'd lost. He mentioned concerns about our financial management, but couldn't provide any details about our actual financial situation. Each answer revealed more clearly that he had no actual knowledge of our business operations, despite claiming to be Maria's chosen business partner. He spoke in generalities and platitudes, the kind of vague complaints that someone might make about any business without understanding the specific challenges and opportunities we faced. After about 10 minutes of this increasingly uncomfortable interrogation, I stopped asking questions. Thank you for sharing this with everyone, David. I think it's important that family business be handled transparently. So you'll honor the agreement? He asked, relief flooding his voice as he apparently interpreted my diplomatic response as acceptance. We'll definitely need to review this through proper legal channels, I said carefully. There are procedures that need to be followed with any changes to business ownership. Jennifer Walsh will need to examine the documentation and verify its authenticity before any transfers can take place. That seemed to satisfy him, and he even looked pleased with himself as our family members began approaching him with questions and congratulations. I watched with a mixture of sadness and amazement as David basked in the attention, accepting handshakes and pats on the back from relatives who were impressed by his apparent business success. The party gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy, though I could feel people watching me more carefully for the rest of the evening. Several relatives approached me privately to ask if I was okay with David's revelation, and I assured them that everything would be handled appropriately through legal channels. My parents looked concerned, but seemed to accept my calm response as evidence that the situation was manageable. When it was time to leave, David cornered me by my car in my parents' driveway. The sun had finally set, and the temperature had dropped to a merely uncomfortable 95 degrees. Somewhere in the distance, neighbors were setting off illegal fireworks, and the air smelled like sulfur and barbecue smoke. I know this is a lot to process, he said, his tone now conciliatory and almost gentle. But I really think this could be good for both of us. Maria saw potential in me that you've never been willing to see. She understood that I could bring a different perspective to the business. I'm sure she did, I replied noncommittally, not wanting to escalate the situation in my parents' driveway where neighbors might overhear. We could make a great team, he continued, warming to his theme. Your creativity and client skills, my practical experience and business sense. Maria always said that successful companies need diverse perspectives and complementary skill sets. The irony of him quoting business advice that Maria had never given him was almost overwhelming, but I managed to keep my expression neutral. We'll talk soon, David. This is obviously something that needs to be handled carefully and professionally. That seemed to satisfy him, and he even hugged me goodbye, the first physical affection we'd shared in months. As I drove home through the Phoenix streets, past strip malls and desert landscaping illuminated by streetlights, I had time to process what had just happened. David had clearly put significant effort into this scheme. The forged document was sophisticated enough that it might fool someone who wasn't familiar with our actual legal paperwork. He had crafted a story that played on family sympathies and positioned himself as Maria's ally rather than my enemy. He had even prepared answers to obvious questions, though those answers had fallen apart under scrutiny. But he had made one critical error. He had underestimated both my knowledge of our business and Maria's character. What David didn't know, what no one in my family knew, was that Maria and I had implemented additional security measures in our partnership agreement after a competitor had tried to poach our biggest client 2 years earlier with false claims about our business practices and partnership stability. Working with Jennifer Walsh, we had established a comprehensive documentation system for any changes to our partnership. Any modifications required not just signatures, but video recordings of both parties explicitly stating their intentions, witnessed by Jennifer herself. We had also set up a secure digital vault containing all official business documents, with timestamps and digital signatures that would be nearly impossible to forge convincingly. More importantly, the timeline David had given was impossible. In January, Maria had been in Guadalajara, Mexico, caring for her sick grandmother for 3 weeks. She couldn't have met with David at a coffee shop in Phoenix because she wasn't even in the country. I had extensive email and text records of our communications during that period, as we had been managing client projects remotely while she dealt with her family emergency. Carmen Rodriguez, Maria's grandmother, had been battling cancer, and Maria had traveled to Mexico to help coordinate her care and spend what turned out to be her final weeks with the woman who had raised her after her parents immigrated to the United States. Maria had kept me updated daily about her grandmother's condition and the challenges of managing our business responsibilities from another country. The next morning, I called Jennifer Walsh and scheduled an emergency meeting. Her office was in a sleek high-rise in downtown Phoenix, all glass and steel that reflected the intense Arizona sun and provided stunning views of the Valley of the Sun. The building housed several prestigious law firms, and Walsh & Associates occupied the entire 15th floor. Jennifer was in her 50s, with silver hair that she wore in a sophisticated bob and the kind of sharp intelligence that had made her one of the most respected business attorneys in the state. She had built her practice over 25 years, specializing in small business law and partnership agreements. She was known for her meticulous attention to detail and her ability to anticipate potential problems before they became actual crises. "Jessica," she said, embracing me briefly as I entered her corner office. "I was so sorry to hear about David's announcement yesterday. Your mother called me this morning, worried sick about what this might mean for the business." I should have known my mother would reach out to Jennifer. She had handled our family's legal needs for years and was almost like an aunt to me, someone I had known since childhood who had watched my career develop with genuine interest and pride. "Let me see the document," Jennifer said, settling behind her mahogany desk and putting on her reading glasses. I handed over copies I had made of David's papers early that morning, scanning them with the printer in my home office. Jennifer examined them carefully, occasionally making notes on a legal pad and referring to files she pulled from her desk drawer. After about 15 minutes of careful review, she looked up with a grim expression. "This is fraud, Jessica. Multiple counts, actually. Forgery, falsification of legal documents, and potentially extortion, depending on how your brother planned to use this to extract money or ownership from you." She pointed out several technical issues I had missed during my quick review the night before. Incorrect formatting for Arizona partnership agreements, an invalid notary seal that didn't match any registered notary in the state database, and legal language that was inconsistent with current state requirements for business partnership modifications. "But here's the thing," she continued, leaning back in her chair. "The document itself is sophisticated enough that it might fool someone who isn't familiar with proper legal documentation. Your brother either got help from someone with legal knowledge or spent considerable time researching how to make this look authentic." I thought about David's comment regarding Maria seeing potential in him. Had he been planning this since her death? Or even before? The level of detail in the forged documents suggested weeks or months of preparation. "What do you recommend?" I asked. "First, we need to gather all the evidence that disproves his claims," Jennifer replied, pulling out a fresh legal pad to make notes. "The digital vault records, communication logs from January showing Maria was in Mexico, and any other documentation that establishes the timeline and proves this partnership agreement never existed." She continued outlining our options. "Then we need to decide how you want to handle this. Criminal charges, which would likely mean jail time for David, or family mediation, which might preserve relationships but wouldn't necessarily prevent future attempts at fraud." "I don't want to destroy my family," I said slowly, thinking about the shocked faces of my relatives the night before. "But I also can't let him get away with this. If I don't respond firmly, he'll try something else, and other people might believe his lies." Jennifer nodded understandingly. She had handled similar cases before and knew the delicate balance between justice and family preservation. "There's a third option. We could arrange a private confrontation with a clear ultimatum. He retracts his claims publicly and agrees to legal restrictions preventing future attempts. Or we pursue criminal charges with the full weight of the evidence we can gather." Before making any decisions, I wanted to understand David's motivations better. Jennifer recommended hiring a private investigator to look into David's current financial and personal situation. If he was desperate enough to forge legal documents and commit fraud against his own family, there had to be compelling reasons driving his behavior. "I know someone who specializes in financial fraud cases," Jennifer said, reaching for her phone. "Marcus Chen is a former Phoenix police detective who now works as a private investigator. He's discreet, thorough, and has experience with family fraud situations." Marcus arrived at Jennifer's office within an hour, a stocky man in his 40s with graying hair and the kind of steady, observant demeanor that suggested law enforcement background. He listened carefully as I explained the situation, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions about David's relationship history, employment patterns, and financial status. "How much do you actually know about your brother's current circumstances?" Marcus asked. "When did you last have a detailed conversation about his living situation, his job, his relationships?" I realized with some embarrassment how little I actually knew about David's day-to-day life. We had grown so distant over the past year that our interactions were limited to family gatherings and brief, superficial conversations. I knew he had been working construction and dating someone named Ashley, but I couldn't even say with certainty where he was currently living or whether he was still employed. "That's not uncommon in families where there's been ongoing conflict," Marcus assured me. "People often assume they know more about their relatives' situations than they actually do. I'll need a few days to compile a comprehensive picture." Marcus's investigation revealed a troubling pattern that was far worse than I had imagined. David was in significant financial trouble, approximately $45,000 in credit card debt spread across 8 different cards, 3 months behind on rent for his apartment in a rundown complex near Sky Harbor Airport, and facing potential legal action from several creditors who had been trying to collect on overdue accounts. His car, a 2015 Ford pickup truck that he was proud of and had modified with expensive accessories, had been repossessed the previous month. He had been borrowing money from friends and distant relatives to cover basic expenses like groceries and utilities, often lying about the reasons he needed financial help. More concerning, Marcus discovered that David had been telling people for weeks about his impending business opportunity that would solve all his financial problems permanently. He had even put down deposits on a new apartment in an upscale complex in Scottsdale and a used BMW, apparently confident that his scheme would work and provide him with the money needed to transform his lifestyle. "There's something else," Marcus said during our follow-up meeting 2 days later. "Your brother has been researching bankruptcy law, inheritance fraud, and business partnership law. His browser history shows extensive searches about contesting wills, challenging business partnerships, and the legal requirements for partnership documentation in Arizona." Marcus showed me printouts of David's internet search history, which painted a picture of someone who had been methodically researching how to forge legal documents and manipulate family relationships for financial gain. The searches went back nearly 2 months, suggesting that this hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment decision, but a carefully planned operation. This wasn't just desperation, it was premeditation. David had been planning this since shortly after Maria's death, possibly even before her estate had been settled. He had researched the legal requirements, identified weaknesses in family relationships, and crafted a story designed to maximize his chances of success while minimizing the risk of immediate detection. Armed with this information, I made my decision. I would confront David privately, give him one chance to confess and make things right, and then take appropriate action based on his response. If he was willing to admit his fraud and work toward making amends, I might consider alternatives to criminal prosecution. If he continued lying or attempted to escalate the situation, I would pursue every legal remedy available. I called David and asked him to meet me at Papago Park, the same place where we used to hike as children during family outings. It seemed fitting somehow, returning to a location that held positive memories from our childhood, before choices and circumstances had driven us apart. He arrived looking optimistic and confident, probably expecting me to discuss partnership details or the logistics of transferring ownership. I had brought a folder containing printouts of all the evidence Jennifer and Marcus had compiled, but I kept it closed on the picnic table between us. "Before we talk about your partnership proposal," I said, "I need to ask you some specific questions about your meeting with Maria." David launched into his story again, providing the same vague details about Maria's supposed concerns about my business management. This time, I took careful notes, letting him dig himself deeper into the lie with each elaboration. "That's interesting," I said when he finished his rehearsed narrative, "because Maria was in Guadalajara the entire month of January, caring for her grandmother who was dying of cancer." David's face went pale, and I could see him rapidly trying to recalculate his story. "Maybe it was February," he said quickly, but his voice lacked the confidence he'd shown moments before. "It wasn't February either," I replied, opening my folder to reveal the first pieces of evidence. Here are her flight records, hotel receipts, and email communications from that time. She was out of the country for 3 weeks and then spent the remaining time in February preparing for the new client presentations we had scheduled. I continued methodically presenting evidence, the digital vault records showing no changes to our partnership agreement, the technical flaws in his forged document, the impossible timeline of his alleged meetings with Maria, and finally, Marcus's investigation into his financial situation and research history. "You're in debt, David. Serious debt. You've been telling people for weeks that you had a business deal that would solve your money problems. This isn't about Maria seeing potential in you. This is about you being desperate enough to forge legal documents and commit fraud against your own family." David sat in stunned silence as the weight of being completely exposed settled over him. The desert around us was quiet, except for the sound of traffic from the nearby freeway and the occasional call of a cactus wren. For a moment, I thought he might confess and apologize, that we might be able to work through this crisis and find a path toward rebuilding our relationship. Instead, he got angry. "So what if I need money?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the red rock formations around us. "You've got more than you know what to do with, and I'm drowning. Family is supposed to help family. That's what Mom and Dad always taught us." "Helping family doesn't mean letting them commit crimes against you," I replied firmly. "What you've done is illegal, David. You could go to prison for this. Fraud, forgery, extortion, these are serious felonies that carry significant penalties." "You wouldn't," he said, but uncertainty crept into his voice as he realized I wasn't responding the way he had expected. "Try me," I said, my patience finally exhausted. "I loved Maria like a sister, and you've dishonored her memory by claiming she betrayed our partnership. You've lied to our entire family and tried to steal something that represents years of hard work and sacrifice. You've committed multiple felonies based on the assumption that I would be too kind or too weak to hold you accountable." I leaned forward, making sure he understood the severity of the situation. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call every family member who was at that barbecue and tell them you lied. You're going to explain that you forged the document and that Maria never approached you about any partnership. You're going to publicly apologize for trying to defraud me and dishonoring Maria's memory." "And then?" he asked quietly, his anger deflating into something closer to fear. Then you're going to get help, I continued. Financial counseling, therapy, whatever it takes to address the issues that led you to think this was acceptable. And if you ever attempt anything like this again, any fraud, any lies, any attempts to manipulate family relationships for personal gain, I will press charges without hesitation. David was quiet for a long time, staring at the red dirt between his feet. The Arizona sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded me of better times when we were children exploring these same trails together. What if I can't fix the financial stuff? He asked finally, his voice small and defeated. What if it's too late and I've already ruined everything? Then you file for bankruptcy like a responsible adult, I said, my tone softening slightly as I heard genuine vulnerability in his voice for the first time. You work with credit counselors, you make payment plans, you rebuild your life honestly. You don't commit fraud against your family. Will you help me? He asked, and for the first time in years, he sounded like the little brother I remembered, scared, lost, but still hoping for rescue. I considered this carefully. The hurt and anger were still fresh, but underneath those emotions was the love I'd always felt for David, complicated now by disappointment and broken trust. I'll help you find resources, counseling services, financial advisors, maybe even a job at one of our client companies if you prove you're serious about changing. But I won't give you money directly, and I won't compromise my business to bail you out. That's fair, he said, nodding slowly. More than fair, after what I did. 3 days later, David called a family meeting at our parents' house. The same relatives who had witnessed his original announcement were invited back, along with a few others who had heard the story secondhand and wanted to understand what was happening. My mother had been calling family members all week, trying to manage the situation and minimize embarrassment, but she couldn't prevent the gathering that David himself had requested. This time, there were no decorations or festive atmosphere. The July heat was even more oppressive than it had been during the 4th of July celebration, with temperatures reaching 115 degrees. Everyone gathered in my parents' living room, where the air conditioning provided relief, but couldn't eliminate the tension that filled the space. David stood before the assembled family, his hands shaking slightly as he began to speak. He looked like he had lost weight in just a few days, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. I need to tell you all something important about what I said at the 4th of July barbecue, he began, his voice barely above a whisper before gaining strength. Everything I told you about Maria and the partnership agreement was a lie. He explained everything, the financial pressure that had been building for months, the desperate measures he had taken to try to solve his problems, the research he had done into legal fraud, and the careful planning that had gone into creating the forged document. He took full responsibility without making excuses or blaming his circumstances. I forged Maria's signature, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I made up the story about her coming to me with concerns about Jessica's business management. I created a fake partnership agreement and presented it to all of you as if it were real, hoping that family pressure would convince Jessica to honor it even if she suspected it was fake. The silence in the room was deafening. My father was staring at David with an expression of profound disappointment, while my mother had tears streaming down her face. Several relatives looked angry, others seemed confused, and a few appeared to be struggling with their own emotions about being deceived. Jessica has every right to press charges against me, David concluded. What I did was criminal, and it was wrong. I've dishonored Maria's memory, betrayed my sister's trust, and lied to all of you. I'm sorry to everyone for involving you in this deception. The family's reaction was mixed and intense. My father stood up and walked out of the room without saying a word, clearly too angry to trust himself to respond appropriately. My mother broke down completely, sobbing as she processed the reality that her son had committed serious crimes against his own sister. Several relatives expressed anger about being deceived and manipulated. Uncle Roberto, who had served in the military and valued honor above almost everything else, was particularly harsh in his criticism. This is unforgivable, he said, his voice shaking with rage. To lie about a dead woman, to try to steal from your own sister while she's grieving. There's no honor in this, David. No honor at all. But there was also compassion, particularly from my Aunt Sarah, who had struggled with financial difficulties herself during her divorce years earlier and understood the desperation that could drive poor decisions. We all make mistakes, she said quietly. The question is what David does now to make things right. What happens now? My mother asked through her tears, looking between David and me as if we might somehow find a solution that would undo the damage. David is going to get help, I said, trying to inject some hope into the devastating situation. Financial counseling, therapy, and hopefully stable employment. He's going to work on understanding why he made these choices and ensuring it never happens again. And you're not pressing charges? My father asked, having returned to the room with his emotions somewhat under control. Not if he follows through on his commitments, I replied. But this is his one and only chance. Any future deception or fraud will result in immediate legal action, and everyone in this room is a witness to that promise. Over the following months, David surprised everyone, including me, by actually following through on his commitments. He enrolled in financial counseling through a nonprofit credit counseling service and began working with a therapist to address what his counselor diagnosed as underlying anxiety and depression that had contributed to his poor decision-making. The therapy sessions revealed patterns of behavior that went back to childhood, feelings of inadequacy compared to my academic and professional achievements, financial anxiety that stemmed from our parents' own struggles when we were young, and a tendency to seek short-term solutions to long-term problems. David began to understand how these patterns had led him to increasingly desperate measures when faced with financial crisis. More significantly, he found employment as a project coordinator at a construction company called Desert Vista Development, work that played to his practical skills while providing stability and benefits. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work that allowed him to begin addressing his debts systematically rather than ignoring them and hoping they would disappear. The job was physically demanding but mentally satisfying in ways that his previous employment had never been. David discovered that he had a talent for managing complex projects and coordinating between different trades and contractors. His supervisor, Jim Patterson, became something of a mentor, helping David develop professional skills and work habits that had been lacking in his previous positions. Our relationship remained cautious, but gradually improved. David would check in periodically, sharing updates about his progress and asking for advice about financial planning and career development. I helped him create a realistic budget and debt repayment plan, and when he proved he was serious about change, I provided references that helped him secure better employment opportunities. The process wasn't smooth or linear. There were setbacks and moments when David seemed to revert to old patterns of thinking. During one particularly difficult conversation about 3 months after his confession, he expressed frustration that his financial situation wasn't improving faster despite his efforts. "I'm doing everything right," he said during a coffee meeting at a neutral location downtown. "I'm working full-time, I'm seeing the therapist, I'm making payments on my debts, but it feels like I'm barely making progress. Sometimes I wonder if it would have been easier to just let you press charges and declare bankruptcy." "Recovery takes time," I reminded him. "You didn't accumulate $45,000 in debt overnight, and you won't eliminate it overnight either. But you're building something sustainable now instead of just looking for quick fixes." "I know you're right," he said, stirring his coffee absently. "It's just hard to stay motivated when the progress feels so slow." "The progress isn't just financial," I pointed out. "You've been at the same job for 3 months now, which is longer than any position you've held in the past 2 years. You're developing professional relationships and learning skills that will serve you for the rest of your career. You're addressing the underlying issues that led to the financial problems in the first place." These conversations helped David maintain perspective during difficult moments and reinforce the positive changes he was making. I began to see glimpses of the person he could become: responsible, reliable, and genuinely committed to rebuilding his life on a foundation of honesty rather than manipulation. The business continued to thrive despite the personal drama. With Maria's parents' blessing, I had established the Maria Rodriguez Memorial Scholarship Fund, providing financial assistance for young Latinas interested in pursuing careers in digital marketing and business. The fund was supported by our clients and industry partners, and we held an annual fundraising event that became one of Phoenix's premier networking opportunities for marketing professionals. I also expanded the company's services to include training and consulting for small business owners who wanted to manage their own marketing efforts but needed guidance on strategy and implementation. This allowed us to serve a broader range of clients while honoring Maria's commitment to helping small businesses succeed. The experience with David had taught me valuable lessons about the importance of proper documentation and legal protection, even in family relationships. I began speaking publicly about business partnerships and fraud prevention, sharing my story at conferences and workshops for entrepreneurs and small business owners. Trust is essential in any relationship, I would tell audiences, but trust without verification can leave you vulnerable to betrayal. Proper documentation and legal safeguards aren't signs of distrust. They're signs of professionalism and respect for all parties involved. The company now employed 15 people and had been recognized as one of Arizona's fastest-growing small businesses for the 4th consecutive year. We had opened a satellite office in Tucson and were considering expansion into other Southwest markets. The success felt bittersweet without Maria to share it, but I knew she would have been proud of how we had honored her vision while adapting to new challenges. 6 months after the confrontation, David and I met for lunch at Barrio Cafe, Maria's favorite Mexican restaurant in downtown Phoenix. It was the first time we had spent time together socially since the whole ordeal began, and I wasn't sure what to expect from the interaction. The restaurant was busy with the usual lunch crowd of downtown professionals and tourists, and we found a quiet table near the back where we could talk without being overheard. David looked healthier than he had in months. He had gained back some weight, the dark circles under his eyes had disappeared, and there was a calmness about him that I hadn't seen in years. "I've been thinking about what you said that day at Papago Park," David said over chips and salsa. "About how family is supposed to help family. I realized I had it completely backwards." "How so?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. I thought family meant you owed me something because we shared parents, he explained, choosing his words carefully. But real family means caring about each other's well-being, even when it's difficult or inconvenient. What I did didn't help you at all. It was selfish and destructive. I nodded, appreciating his insight. The therapy seemed to be helping him understand patterns of thinking that had contributed to his problems. It took courage to admit that publicly. I know it wasn't easy. It was the least I could do, he said. I just hope someday I can earn back your trust completely. You're already making progress, I replied honestly. Trust is rebuilt through consistent actions over time, and you're doing the work. The David I'm having lunch with today is very different from the David who showed up drunk at my office demanding ownership in my business. I was in such a dark place then, he admitted. Everything felt hopeless, and I was looking for someone to blame instead of taking responsibility for my own choices. I convinced myself that you owed me success because you had achieved it, and I hadn't. As we talked, I reflected on how much had changed since Maria's death. The grief would always be there, but I had found ways to honor her memory while building something positive from the pain. The business was stronger, my family relationships were more honest, and I had learned valuable lessons about protecting what matters most while still leaving room for forgiveness and growth. Looking back, I realized that David's betrayal, while painful and traumatic, had ultimately made both of us stronger. It forced me to examine my assumptions about family loyalty and taught me that love sometimes requires setting firm boundaries. For David, it had been a wake-up call that forced him to confront patterns of behavior that were destroying his life. Maria would have been proud of how I handled the situation, with strength and integrity, but also with enough compassion to leave room for redemption. She had always believed that people were capable of change when faced with clear consequences and appropriate support. 1 year after the confrontation, I received a handwritten letter from David. He had been promoted to senior project coordinator and had paid off nearly half of his debt ahead of schedule. More importantly, he had met someone, a teacher named Rebecca, who worked at an elementary school in Tempe, who shared his commitment to building a stable plus honest life. I know I can never completely undo what I did, he wrote in his careful handwriting. But I want you to know that your willingness to give me a second chance saved my life. Not just financially, but emotionally and spiritually. You showed me what real family looks like. Not people who enable each other's worst behaviors, but people who hold each other accountable while still offering support and hope. The letter continued, Rebecca knows everything about what I did and how you responded. She says it tells her everything she needs to know about both of us, that I'm capable of learning from my mistakes, and that you're the kind of person who values justice but doesn't close the door on redemption. We're talking about getting married next year, and I hope you'll consider being part of that celebration. The letter made me cry. Not from sadness, but from hope and relief. People could change. Relationships could heal. And sometimes the most painful experiences led to the most meaningful growth. I called David that evening and had the longest, most honest conversation we'd shared in years. We talked about the past, the present, and our hopes for the future. We talked about Maria and how her memory had influenced both of our journeys toward becoming better people. And we talked about the possibility of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than obligation or competition. I've learned something important this year, David said toward the end of our conversation. Success isn't about what you achieve compared to other people. It's about becoming the person you're capable of being and making choices you can be proud of. Maria would have loved hearing you say that, I replied. She always believed that everyone had potential, but that potential had to be developed through honest work and genuine commitment to growth. I wish I could apologize to her, David said quietly, for what I said about her, for using her death to try to manipulate you, for dishonoring her memory with my lies. I think she would have forgiven you, I said, and I meant it. Maria believed in second chances for people who were genuinely committed to change. She would have been proud of the work you've done this year. 2 years after the confrontation, David and Rebecca were married in a small ceremony at my parents' house. I stood as David's best woman, a role that would have seemed impossible during the darkest days of our conflict. In my speech at the reception, I talked about the power of redemption and the importance of family that chooses to grow together rather than simply endure each other. The business continued to flourish, and the Maria Rodriguez Memorial Scholarship Fund had grown into a significant force for supporting young women in business and marketing. We had awarded scholarships to 12 recipients, several of whom had gone on to successful careers with major corporations or had started their own businesses. I had also begun dating again, slowly and carefully. His name was Michael Torres, a professor of business ethics at Arizona State University who understood both the demands of running a company and the importance of maintaining personal integrity in all relationships. We had met at a conference where I was speaking about business partnerships and legal protection, and he had impressed me with thoughtful questions about balancing trust with verification in professional relationships. Michael knew about my history with David and Maria, and he respected both the grief I still carried and the boundaries I had learned to establish. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, he had said during one of our early conversations. It means choosing to move forward without being defined by past hurts. If there's one lesson I would share with anyone facing family betrayal, it's this. Protect yourself with clear boundaries and legal documentation, but don't close the door completely on redemption. People are capable of change when they face real consequences and receive appropriate support. Trust can be rebuilt, but it requires time, consistency, and genuine commitment to different choices. The most important thing I learned from this experience is that love and accountability aren't opposites. They're partners. Real love requires setting boundaries and enforcing consequences when those boundaries are violated. Enabling destructive behavior isn't kindness. It's a form of cruelty that prevents people from learning and growing. Have you ever had to confront family members about dishonest behavior? How did you balance accountability with compassion? What strategies have you found effective for rebuilding trust after betrayal? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Sometimes the most difficult family situations teach us the most about love, boundaries, and forgiveness. Recovery from betrayal is possible, but it requires honesty from all parties, clear consequences for harmful behavior, and a commitment to different choices moving forward. Remember, healing is possible, but it requires honesty, accountability, and time. Thank you for reading, and I hope my story helps someone else navigate their own family challenges with wisdom and strength. Whether you're dealing with betrayal, financial difficulties, or strained family relationships, know that change is possible when people are willing to do the difficult work of examining their choices and committing to better ones. The journey from betrayal to redemption isn't easy or quick, but it's one of the most meaningful paths a family can walk together. Maria's memory continues to inspire both David and me to be our best selves, honest, compassionate, and committed to building something meaningful rather than just pursuing personal gain.